Westminster Abbey, London, Friday, May 6, 1960. Just before 11:30 in the morning, a glass coach pulls away from Clarence House and turns onto the Mall. Inside sits Princess Margaret, dressed in a silk organza gown by Norman Hartnell, wearing the Poltimore Tiara she had purchased at auction rather than borrowed from the family vault, about to become the centerpiece of something entirely new. Her marriage to society photographer Antony Armstrong-Jones would be the first royal wedding ever broadcast on live television. The BBC had Richard Dimbleby in position. Over 20 million people in Britain were watching. Globally, BBC retrospective material puts the total estimated audience at approximately 300 million. Viewers in Australia, Canada, and the United States who had never seen anything quite like this. The wedding was meant to be everything the monarchy needed at that moment: modern, romantic, optimistic. Armstrong-Jones was untitled at the time of the ceremony, technically a commoner, the first man in roughly 400 years to marry a king's daughter without a hereditary peerage. He was a photographer, not an earl. He rode a motorbike. He was precisely the kind of person who made the institution look like it was capable of evolving. What almost no one watching that morning knew was this. Somewhere in Bath, at a house called Widcombe Manor, a woman named Camilla Fry, the wife of the man who had been announced as Armstrong-Jones's best man just 7 weeks earlier, was approximately 8 months pregnant, and the child she was carrying was Armstrong-Jones's. The wedding was real, the cameras were real, the 300 million viewers were real. The pregnancy was also real. This is the story that preceded all the others. To understand how this happened, you need to know who Antony Armstrong-Jones actually was, not the Earl of Snowdon, the title the Queen would grant him in October 1961, but the man who existed before all of that. He was born on March 7, 1930, at 25 Eaton Terrace in Belgravia, the son of a Welsh barrister and a society hostess. His parents divorced when he was 4. At 16, he contracted polio on holiday in Wales and spent 6 months recovering in the Liverpool Royal Infirmary. His sister was the only family member who visited. The illness left his left leg an inch shorter than his right and gave him a permanent slight limp. He went to Eton, then to Jesus College, Cambridge, where he failed his second-year architecture exams and pivoted to photography. By his mid-20s, he had begun transforming British theatre photography, replacing conventional posed portraits with grainy, handheld images taken during rehearsals, images that, as History Extra describes, were blown up into poster-sized shots of actors in full flow that compelled from across the street. His uncle was the stage designer Oliver Messel. His social world stretched from the theatrical to the aristocratic, and he moved through it with a quality that biographer Anne de Courcy identifies in the very first sentence of her 2008 biography, Snowdon, the Biography, a book for which Armstrong-Jones gave her, in her own words, full and unfettered access to his files and archives. The twin motivating forces in his life, de Courcy writes, were work and sex, both backed by immense, charismatic charm and a drive unfettered by many of the social constraints of his class and day. By 1958, that charm had brought him into Princess Margaret's orbit. They had encountered each other before. He photographed the wedding of her friends Lady Anne Coke and Colin Tennant in April 1956, and by 1957 had then portraits of the Queen at Buckingham Palace. A dinner party hosted by her lady-in-waiting, Lady Elizabeth Cavendish, drew them together properly. They began meeting in secret, his studio in East London, her social engagements, the gap between them invisible to anyone watching. Margaret, according to de Courcy, initially assumed he was homosexual. She told Christopher Warwick, "I enjoyed his company very much, but I didn't take a lot of notice of him because I thought he was queer." She was wrong about that, in the straightforward sense. The misreading would cost her considerably. Margaret came to this relationship carrying weight that few other people in Britain understood from the inside. In October 1955, she had issued one of the more extraordinary public statements in modern royal history. She was ending her relationship with Group Captain Peter Townsend, a decorated RAF war hero who had served as equerry to her father, King George VI, and with whom she had been in love for years. The statement read, "I would like it to be known that I have decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend. Mindful of the Church's teaching that Christian marriage is indissoluble and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have decided to put these considerations before any others." The government had threatened to strip her of her royal rights and income from the civil list if she proceeded. Archbishop Geoffrey Fisher had counseled her against it at a private dinner on October 19th. She chose duty over love. By almost any measure, it was a genuine sacrifice in the name of an institutional principle. 4 years later, in the autumn of 1959, she and Armstrong-Jones began discussing marriage. The private engagement took shape while they were staying at Widcombe Manor in Bath, the home of Armstrong-Jones's close friend Jeremy Fry and his wife Camilla. Armstrong-Jones sought the Queen's approval over Christmas 1959. The public announcement was held back at the Queen's request until after the birth of Prince Andrew on February 19, 1960. 7 days later, on February 26, Clarence House issued the formal statement. The text named Mr. Antony Charles Robert Armstrong-Jones, son of Mr. R.O.L. Armstrong-Jones, Queen's Counsel, and the Countess of Ross. Life magazine called the union wildly unconventional, and then gave in. The doting millions were electrified and delighted. On the day of that announcement, Camilla Fry was approximately 6.5 months pregnant. Camilla Fry, née Grinling, was born in 1933. She had married Jeremy Fry in 1955. They lived at Widcombe Manor, the same house where Armstrong-Jones and Margaret's private engagement was finalized, the same house where their social circle gathered on weekends, the house to which Armstrong-Jones had come regularly for years. Jeremy Fry was an heir to the Fry's chocolate family, an inventor and entrepreneur, and arts patron. Camilla had known Armstrong-Jones before her marriage. De Courcy's biography identifies her as a former girlfriend whose relationship with him had not entirely extinguished after she married his closest friend. People magazine, drawing on De Courcy's research, states directly that in the autumn of 1959, while Armstrong-Jones was visiting Margaret at Balmoral in October, while they were privately deciding to marry, he was simultaneously sleeping with Camilla Fry. Working back from a birth date in late May 1960, the gestational timeline places conception in July or August 1959, with some accounts suggesting early September. De Courcy's biography describes the dynamic at Widcombe Manor in terms that make the situation somewhat comprehensible, even if it doesn't excuse it. Jeremy's passion for Camilla had cooled. The environment of the household, she writes, constituted what she calls a lawless zone. Importantly, no named biographer explicitly states that a sexual affair between Armstrong-Jones and Camilla continued into the February through May 1960 engagement window itself. The conception preceded the private engagement. What isn't in any doubt is what that conception produced. By the time the engagement was publicly announced on February 26th, Camilla was visibly pregnant with Armstrong-Jones's child. The whole of the public engagement period, the ring, the photographs, the announcements, the planning, unfolded while that pregnancy advanced toward term. The best man situation is where the story's threads become visible, even if none of the people watching in 1960 could see why. On March 18, 1960, Buckingham Palace announced that Jeremy Fry would serve as best man at the May wedding. Time magazine described him that week as a longtime bohemian friend of Tony Armstrong-Jones. 3 weeks later, in early April, Fry withdrew. The stated reason, delivered through royal channels, a recurrence of jaundice. Time reported the announcement and noted that when reporters pressed for any other explanation, a royal spokesman replied, "No comment." The real reason wasn't jaundice. The Sunday paper, The People, had surfaced a 1952 arrest record. Jeremy Fry had been detained in Hyde Park that year, pleaded guilty, and paid a fine of £2 for what contemporaneous reports called a minor offense. Later, biographical and press accounts consistently identify the charge as importuning for immoral purposes, the standard legal language at the time for homosexual solicitation. Fry had reportedly told the court, "I'm afraid I was rather drunk." The Times obituary of Jeremy Fry, written decades later, has no patience for the euphemism. It wasn't a suitable role for a man with a conviction for a homosexuality offense. Fry, the public was informed, was suffering from jaundice. The replacement, announced by the New York Times on April 10th, was Dr. Roger William Gilliatt, a London neurologist, 37 years old, and the son of Sir William Gilliatt, former surgeon gynecologist to the Queen. One later account describes the replacement as impeccably heterosexual, which captures the palace's logic efficiently enough. At no point did contemporaneous coverage connect Fry's departure to Camilla's pregnancy. The two situations, one officially acknowledged and resolved, one entirely submerged, were running in parallel. Only one of them surfaced that spring. On the morning of May 6th, Westminster Abbey filled with prime ministers. Harold Macmillan was there. Winston Churchill was there. Commonwealth leaders attended because the wedding coincided with the 10th Commonwealth Prime Ministers' Conference at Windsor. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher, the same man who had privately counseled Margaret against marrying Townsend 5 years earlier, conducted the service. Dr. Gilliatt stood where Jeremy Fry had been announced to stand. The BBC cameras covered every movement. The glass coach arrived at 11:30. Armstrong-Jones waited at the altar. After the ceremony, after the balcony appearance, after the wedding breakfast for 120 guests, beef fillets, green beans, a soufflé, the couple boarded the royal yacht Britannia for a 6-week Caribbean honeymoon. They were at sea when Polly Fry was born. The date is given as May 28th in the Telegraph's account and De Courcy's biography, though Wikipedia's wedding article gives May 26th. Either date places the birth 3 weeks into the marriage. Polly was registered as the daughter of Jeremy and Camilla Fry. She grew up believing Jeremy was her father. De Courcy records a small detail about the moment Margaret departed Clarence House for the Abbey. As she passed the house's steward on the top step, he bowed and said, "Goodbye, Your Royal Highness." And then, as the coach pulled away, "And we hope forever." For 4 decades, what had happened at Widcombe Manor in the summer and autumn of 1959 stayed precisely where it had been left. Armstrong-Jones became Earl of Snowdon. His son David was born in November 1961. His daughter Sarah followed in 1964. He became one of Britain's most prominent photographers. More than 280 of his photographs entered the permanent collections of the National Portrait Gallery. The Snowdons attended state functions. They hosted parties at Kensington Palace that drew everyone from Peter Sellers to Marlene Dietrich. Journalist Cyril Connolly, on discovering the Snowdons were moored nearby during a Sardinian holiday, apparently declared that not to meet them was like being in the Garden of Eden without seeing God. Meanwhile, Polly Fry was growing up in Bath. The whispers that eventually reached her, rumors that moved through certain social circles without ever acquiring the weight of proof, first arrived when she was a teenager, then persisted through her 20s and 30s. Not until 2004, when she was approximately 44 years old, did she decide she wanted a definitive answer. She arranged a meeting with Armstrong-Jones and asked, according to the account in De Courcy's biography as reported by The Telegraph, whether they could settle the question with a DNA test. He agreed. Both provided swab samples. The result excluded Jeremy Fry as Polly's biological father. It confirmed Armstrong-Jones. When stories first emerged publicly, Armstrong-Jones denied that any test had taken place. Jeremy Fry, still alive, called the claim utter nonsense. Jeremy Fry died on July 18, 2005, in Madurai, India. Approximately 3 years after that, when De Courcy's biography was published and the Telegraph ran the article headlined, "Lord Snowdon fathered a secret love child just months before marrying Princess Margaret," Armstrong-Jones eventually acknowledged it. The test had happened. The result was what the result was. Polly wrote about the experience in the Mirror in 2008. Finding out at the age of 45 that the man I had idolized and put on a pedestal higher than Nelson's column since I was a small child wasn't, in fact, my father, was a hard burden to bear. She added, "Rather than being twisted with guilt and shame at what I've done in uncovering a secret that I should have been told long ago, I can just carry on being little old me, the person I am today." She wasn't included in Armstrong-Jones's will. When he died in 2017, that will was valued at approximately £3.2 million. The marriage itself had run its full, miserable course in the years between the honeymoon and the DNA test. De Courcy's biography is the primary biographical account, and she describes Armstrong-Jones's pattern with some precision. The Guardian's review of the book notes that he liked to keep several women on the go, and may have confined himself to no more than one simultaneous affair, or at most, 2, while married to Margaret. He told De Courcy directly, in the interviews she conducted for the biography, "I believe in serial and simultaneous." His affairs during the marriage included Anne Hills, a journalist with whom he conducted a relationship lasting approximately 20 years. Hills died by suicide in 1996. A later affair with Melanie Cable Alexander, an editor at Country Life, produced a son, Jasper, born April 30, 1998, which ended his second marriage. There were also the written notes. Multiple biographers record that Armstrong-Jones left messages around their Kensington Palace apartments, not correspondence, but inventories of contempt. Notes reading, "24 reasons why I hate you." Notes tucked into her books with the words, "I hate you." The marriage that had opened with a glass coach and 300 million viewers was producing this particular paperwork by its middle years. Margaret wasn't passive in return. She had a brief affair with Anthony Barton, a Bordeaux wine producer and the godfather of their daughter Sarah, in 1966. She had a 1-month liaison with pianist Robin Douglas Home, nephew of former Prime Minister Alec Douglas Home, approximately the following year. Douglas Home died by suicide roughly 18 months after the affair ended. Then, in September 1973, at the Café Royal in Edinburgh, she met Roddy Llewellyn. He was 25. She was 43. The 8-year relationship that followed was the most sustained and most public of her romantic life since the Townsend affair, and it would eventually provide the formal mechanism for the marriage's end. In early 1976, long-lens photographs of Margaret and Llewellyn on the beach at Moustique appeared in the News of the World. The formal separation announcement followed. Buckingham Palace confirmed the marriage had broken down. A Kensington Palace statement noted there were no plans for divorce proceedings. 2 years later, there were. Snowdon issued a television statement after the separation that Margaret later described, on seeing the footage, as the finest acting she had ever witnessed. "I am naturally desperately sad in every way that this has had to come," he said. "I would just like to say 3 things. Firstly, to pray for the understanding of our 2 children. Secondly, to wish Princess Margaret every happiness for her future. Thirdly, to express with the utmost humility my love, admiration, and respect I will always have for her sister, her mother, and her entire family." Margaret, watching the clip. "I have never seen such good acting." The decree nisi was granted in May 1978. The divorce was finalized July 11, 1978. It was the first divorce of a senior member of the House of Windsor in the modern era. The first time the carefully maintained public image of royal family life had fractured through formal legal proceedings rather than mere rumor. Armstrong-Jones remarried Lucy Lindsay Hogg in December 1978. Margaret never remarried. She died February 9, 2002, aged 71. Antony Armstrong-Jones died at his home in Kensington on January 13, 2017. He was 86. Camera Press issued the statement. The Guardian ran an obituary. The BBC ran an obituary. The Telegraph ran an obituary. All of them addressed his photography, his marriage to Margaret, the 1978 divorce, the affairs in general terms. The Guardian's primary focus, for the second marriage's collapse, was Anne Hill's. The Camilla Fry story, the pregnancy that overlapped the public engagement, the child born during the honeymoon, the DNA test that took 44 years to happen, appeared that same year in coverage connected to The Crown's second season and in revisits of de Courcy's 2008 biography. What it didn't receive was the kind of standalone reckoning that typically attaches to figures whose infidelity carries dynastic stakes. That asymmetry is worth naming plainly. Armstrong-Jones wasn't the heir to the throne. His marriage to Princess Margaret wasn't the marriage on which the succession most directly depended. His infidelity was extensive and documented, but the specific pre-wedding element, the pregnancy, the concealed child, the best man situation, the glass coach, has never been the subject of a major broadcast documentary or any formal institutional acknowledgement. It circulates in biographies, in Crown-related coverage, in Polly Fry's own 2008 Mirror piece. It does not carry the institutional weight that an identical story carries when attached to a Prince of Wales. Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles met around 1970 and had a relationship before Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973, and before Charles married Diana Spencer on July 29, 1981. The relationship between Charles and Camilla resumed during his marriage to Diana. In a 1994 television interview with Jonathan Dimbleby, Charles admitted to extramarital relations. In Diana's 1995 Panorama interview, she told Martin Bashir, "There were 3 of us in this marriage." Leaked recordings published in 1992 and 1993 had already made the situation broadly known to anyone paying attention. Charles and Camilla married April 9, 2005. The structural outline is identical to the one that runs through the 1960 story, a man connected to the royal family maintaining a relationship with another woman while presenting a public image of committed partnership, in a ceremony broadcast nationally, producing an institutional performance at odds with a private reality that would emerge only in stages, over decades. Armstrong-Jones did it first. He did it at what was meant to be the monarchy's proof of concept, the first royal wedding ever put on television, staged precisely to demonstrate that the institution could deliver a perfect show for a new mass audience. The pregnancy was already there when Margaret walked down the aisle. The child was born while they were still on the honeymoon, and almost no one knew for 44 years. Charles eventually received documentaries, a Dimbleby biography, a Panorama interview as the competing account, a public reckoning that unfolded across television cycles and newspaper front pages over 3 decades. Camilla Parker Bowles has been the subject of sustained public analysis, rehabilitation narratives, and eventually a coronation. The machinery of royal accountability engaged fully because the stakes demanded it. Antony Armstrong-Jones got the de Courcy biography, a Telegraph article in 2008, and a Newsweek revisit tied to a Netflix drama 9 years later. He died with an estate that excluded the daughter he had fathered before the wedding, and was buried in a family plot at St. Baglan's Church in the remote Welsh village of Llanfaglan, near Carnarvon. The pattern is identical. The accountability wasn't. And the pattern started earlier than anyone discusses. Not in the 1980s, not with the heir to the throne, but in 1960, at the first royal wedding anyone ever watched on television, with a child already 3 weeks from being born into a world that would take 4 more decades to acknowledge her. Margaret gave up Townsend. She cited the Church's teaching that Christian marriage is indissoluble. She accepted the institutional verdict and chose duty over love. Then she married a man who had already, quietly, set aside everything that institutional verdict was supposed to protect, and whose child arrived during the honeymoon to prove it.